Wow, amazing, kia ora koutou. I am Nadia Thorne. As CEO of Black Salt Games and brand new Disc 2 Games, and I am honoured to be speaking here today. In my career so far, I've released dozens of games, some incredible to millions, some incredible only to a few, and some possibly only to me. But I hope very much to even those out over the next few years. My career in game development began 13 years ago, and within the broader industry 18 years ago. And some of my earliest memories are from playing games about 35 years ago. So this journey from playing games to working with gamers and then developers has shaped my love for this industry. Working with teams to create great games for amazing players is what I want to spend my life doing. But it's often not an easy industry. Currently, we're seeing the tightening of first-party and publishing offers. App Store discoverability is in shambles. We've got the shutdown of major studios with hit titles in their portfolios. Investment funds are more competitive. And we can't ignore the unprecedented number of layoffs in the global game industry in the past 2 years. It's estimated that over 20,000 people were laid off in the past 18 months. That's almost 10% of our global industry. There is talent that we have lost that will never return and be realized. And that leads me to make this statement. The video game industry sucks. And that might seem rich coming from someone whose studio had over 1 million sales last year. But where it comes from is over a decade spent crunching, being a minority in game development for all of my aggressiveness, and dealing with multiple redundancy rounds and wondering whether money was going to turn up before next week. However, I truly believe that the video game industry is great, even when it sucks. So even with all of these redundancies, the game industry still grew in revenue and likely in jobs as well last year. New studios are being formed by industry veterans that will both be able to secure backing based on their experience while having creative control of their creations. Our own industry here in New Zealand is faring even better than the global industry, bolstered by our impressive percentage of domestically owned studios and high workplace efficiency. Well done, everyone. While we have a long way to go in terms of diverse representation, especially in senior leadership and decision-making, there are these statistics that also point to great hope. Game development has 2 to 4 times the LGBT+ representation of other industries. This is an incredible industry and is only going to grow and get better, especially with your help. But to be successful, we also need to be prepared for the upheaval that this industry is going to throw at us. For those of us wanting to build and continue our career in game development, or to build studios capable of thriving in spite of, or even because of, the upheaval that our industry continuously faces, we need to look at the wider picture. Look ahead at what might be coming and stock some cards up our sleeves to be ready to ride with the fates of game dev. Let's jump back in time first. 2008, the last massive global recession, and a bunch of studios were impacted. Since then, though, we had the release of the App Store and Google Play, and the mobile gaming industry was born, today worth $100 to $200 billion, bigger than PC and console gaming that came before it, bigger than music and film that came before them. We've gone back, maybe? Unity launched a free version. And this, along with open source software like Blender, GIMP, Krita, and then Unreal, means that the tools that are required to do what we do, the tools that used to cost tens or even hundreds of thousands of dollars in the case of engines, can now be accessed with no money up front. What this tells me is that the next revolution in the game industry is already out there. You might be working on it. More jobs are coming, and way more games are coming. We had the indie revolution with the launch of titles like Braid, Minecraft, and Limbo. And between the App Store and the indie scene, most of our industry here in Aotearoa relies on. Look at how our own industry has performed in the last decade. Revenue has grown 10 times. And we have 2 times the number of people employed in game dev than we did 10 years ago. Salaries have kept up with, or maybe even slightly exceeded, inflation, and game development is now being taught in high schools. A growing back catalogue of games, a growing number of studios supported by startup frameworks, and secondary and tertiary institutions igniting our next generations and better preparing them for our industry means we have a solid foundation for future growth. We'll continue to find it difficult to fill senior and specialist roles, and we always have. That is a symptom of a high-growth industry. But I guess one way you could look at it is it provides incredibly stressful opportunities for motivated and disciplined learners. It's a great position to be in because, as we keep hearing, in the near term, we're facing another economic downturn. And games that are a luxury item, no matter how wrong that feels to say, will be impacted by that. However, with more and more gamers entering the market year on year, and games dollar per entertainment hour ratio being a great value proposition, average spend per user on games is expected to still increase this year. So, there is a steady counterweight for our industry in particular when it comes to a recession. It could still affect our games, though. Gamers are likely to be more risk-averse, less likely to try out untested titles, and will lean more on reviews and recommendations for premium titles. They'll look more closely at the dollar per hour value and be even more likely to wait for discounts and sales. Thriving in these times will require developers to think deeply about where they spend their time and energy, and how they're going to grab those players. Right? The best kinds of games we should be concentrating on making in the near term is really easy. A good game. Sweet. Story-rich, simulation, abstract soundscapes. Go ahead and make whatever game we're capable of, and we can be successful with it, as long as it's good. Maybe I need to go a bit more useful there. Basically, if there is something, I think, that is common across all successful games, it's immersion. Immersion looks different depending on the type of game you're making, but players losing themselves in the world is what matters, and anything that breaks immersion should be eliminated or reduced in priority of its impact. I'm not talking about our world design or narrative. I'm talking here about the technical sides of game development. Reduce wait times, whether for matches or for scene loading. Get the controls right. Never design for a single control system. Work within the constraints of touch or controllers, along with the freedom of mouse and keyboard. Fix those bugs. If there's anything that will kill our games, it's bugs that require resets and restarts. UI doesn't have to be pretty, but it does have to be clear. With DREDGE, it's pretty common knowledge that we weren't expecting things to hit quite as well as they did. I think there's a video of me from NZGDC 2021 outlining my strategy for hitting less than 1/10 of the sales we ended up doing in our first year. But we did have a strategy. Games are not only pieces of art that need to be teased out, refined through feedback, and presented properly to the audience. They're also pieces of software that need planning and scoping, and a business that needs to cover its costs. So I like to make cheat sheets for myself to help categorize and prioritize. And this is my first one. This bucket is in no way an indicator of success. We could have a control system in UI that babies to pensioners can easily pick up and never a crash. Our game can still be unpopular. But if we do have a bunch of crashes and glitches, hello Cyberpunk 2077, if we have really awkward controls or interfaces that frustrate, then, and not a big enough player base with the ability to mod, then our game is not going to review well. And it's pretty sure to be unsuccessful until or unless we can fix it. This bucket is where the immersion in our games comes from. And the further we're able to push these areas, the more satisfied our players will be with their experience. Again, if anything gets in the way of our players accessing these things, they will become dissatisfied. But games do not require the current latest industry standard to be enjoyable. Take soundtrack composition. No music, some music, full soundtrack. There have been games where a soundtrack is highlighted as the only good part. Unfortunately, that's never been a reason to play the game. Not true of the opposite. Games with bad or no soundtracks will still be recommended if they have good gameplay. These are the areas that are constrained by our time, resources, and budget, really. And on the other side, also tend to directly flow into pricing of your game. The more of the above that you get in, the higher you can tend to price your game, although you can get a bonus in. For example, having a 3D cat as your player character might mean being able to charge at least 33% more than you theoretically should, and have your players be happy about it. Other examples of these delighters? An interconnected portal to solve puzzles, a day and night cycle that turns cozy fishing sim into a horror game. This is what it means to not just be a game designer, but a brilliant game designer. That bit of magic that makes our game different from what has come before. It could be understanding that players who will enjoy our worlds will want to put their own stamp on it and share that out with others. It could be providing a farming simulator with deep relationship building woven in, or rewarding death in a roguelike with unique dialogue and story progression. These delighters are incorporated in our games, won't be things we spend anywhere near as much time developing as those first two buckets, but if we have a sprinkling of these delighters, as much as we can of these success multipliers, and have thoroughly addressed these failure indicators, then we can and should be successful. A great game requires two things fundamentally. I know I keep simplifying things hugely. We've just been through the first one, make a great game, cool, tick. The other half of the coin is the players. The number one thing we'll always be contending with is how much money our players are willing to gamble on our games being good. Awareness helps mitigate that, but after doing the social media, the conventions, the demos, it has been my experience that the most impactful thing you can do to increase your sales is to discount your game or your in-app purchases. All of the main platforms support, All of the main platforms support some form of sales pricing and run regular events so that you can opt into, like the now hopefully annual Made in New Zealand Games Steam event. For free-to-play games, it's the same with your in-app purchases. Having the right discounting cadence has the biggest impact on sales. The second most important area for devs to spend their time outside of development is on their storefronts. So learning about categories for the different platforms, finding the right tags, screenshots, putting together trailers, and looking at improving not just conversion in terms of people buying your game, but setting the correct expectations so players aren't disappointed and leave a negative review. It's hard to think of our worlds and stories as a business rather than a creative expression that we want to share. But with so many games that we all have on our list to play, something has to tick a lot of boxes for us to give it a chance. No matter how many people say something's good, if we don't convince players that it's their type of good, they're going to buy something else that they're more sure of in these times. Even in times of plenty, we benefit from clearly articulating our value proposition, helping players who would have been dissatisfied with our game to rule it out. Every negative review saved is a positive review. Our store page is the most important marketing asset. It's the funnel point that every potential customer has to go through. And it's also what will be used by our biggest acquisition channels to determine whether to send customers our way, the digital stores themselves. Demos. Demos are the best tool for building excitement and trust in your game. Yet less than half of developers are utilizing demos. Obviously, if your game is free to play, you've already got this covered. But pre-release, demos are a great vehicle to engage streamers who can amplify your game's awareness, especially when launched in conjunction with some extra visibility, whether that's something like a Steam Next Fest or your own outreach campaigns. Post-release, it is the best way to convert players that are sitting on the fence into satisfied customers, or satisfied non-customers. Still looking at the stores, we move into the next focus. And there's two areas to appease and appeal to get your game advertised on the storefronts: the human curators and the almighty algorithm. So categories, tags, keywords are important. Having your game on that list of games like this or recommended for you of other trusted games is very important to the performance of your game. Securing a spot in the featured sections of storefronts can dramatically increase our game's visibility. Platforms want to highlight new releases, heavy discounts, and significant updates of well-performing games. Initial engagement with the platform holders should start at least 6 months before your event or engagement, and have regular engagements with them throughout that lead-up period. Your release and sales calendars should take the platform holders' events into account and plan around cooldowns so you don't miss out. Things like Halloween stores or Steam summer sales. You need to make sure your discounts are aligning with these big visibility events. And if after streamlining and optimizing and all those good buzzwords, your game's presence on the store, and we still have some time and money to spend, then we start looking at anything outside of the store page, like engaging streamers, media, and doing our own social outreach and community building to help build that awareness of the game. These things do not drive as many wish lists, downloads, or purchases as the storefronts themselves, and take a considerable amount of time and effort. but they can amplify your game further than the storefronts alone. Reviews from reputable sources can greatly influence your purchasing decisions and are important for credibility. Building relationships with game journalists, providing review copies, and ensuring your game is polished before the reviews go out should be a core part of any pre-release plan. You can email or message Western journalists directly very easily. Eastern media does take a bit more work, but is worth it if you can crack it. Making sure you have clear links that allow media to contact you is a big one that we tend to forget in game development. Having a press kit ready to go with game assets, trailers, an info page that you can just link out should you send an email out or anyone email you. Basically, you want to do as much of their job for them as you can and make it as easy as possible for people to share your games with others. Influencers provide trusted recommendations and can significantly boost visibility and drive interest. However, it requires a massive amount of time and due diligence to ensure influencers who align with a game's genre and target audience. And influencer approaches vary by region, so you're going to have to approach sort of Japan-based influencers different from how you would US. I think, though, that there is incredible opportunity here to increase awareness outside of your main outreach channels, so namely in different languages. Also consider early access or exclusive content as an alternative to paying the influencers for their engagements. Reddit, Discord, Steam, these platforms are also great for a direct interaction with dedicated fans and keeping them engaged with the game or the studio, and great for gathering feedback and fostering the community. Again, though, they take a lot of time and effort to build up, but then once they reach a certain size, they can become pretty self-sustaining after that. Just remember, the internet is a toxic cesspool, and no matter how wholesome your community is, you will get some wrong-uns in there that cause all sorts of drama for you. Social media keeps your community engaged and informed about updates and can help you transfer players to your future games. So potentially giving you an inbuilt audience all ready to go. It is one of those things that can be brilliant for your brand with the right approach, but you also have to be careful to make sure you're actually reaching the people that you want to reach, rather than just kind of announcing out into a big echo chamber. In terms of social media and community forums, Reddit and YouTube are the most valuable channels we've found outside of that main storefront page, but they're also the hardest to grow your community in. So you will hit 10,000 followers on X long before you're anywhere close to that on YouTube. Paid advertising, kind of like influencers, but without the chance of someone doing it for free. For you. Useful for the attempted algorithm blessings. So I would use paid advertising in conjunction with another beat, a DLC update, a discount. Basically trying to implement a two-step strategy. So using paid acquisition to bump your numbers, so the storefronts then promote you more than what they might have otherwise. And basically you get to present your players with multiple value propositions in that case. It's risky, it's time-consuming, and it's expensive. The cost per install at the moment is incredibly high, and a very difficult area to really make the most of. But it can also be used for awareness, just much harder to track your return on investment when you're just looking at brand awareness. Our main focus at expos and conventions now is media attention. The shows might be local, but we have a much bigger chance of reaching people in that country and wider if we can get the media there to highlight us. There is limited opportunity for direct interactions with potential players, and I am yet to see any direct impact on sales as a result of attending shows. There is some value in awareness building, though, wish list building, but other channels possibly more effective on a wider scale. So there are more channels, in fact, a couple of big ones that I haven't mentioned here, crowdfunding and early access. And that's because I haven't had first-hand experience of those areas, but I do have theories, of course. So it feels like early access is the preferred route. There's a much bigger audience to work with. I know the 95% cut on the crowdfunding sides, probably feels like it will be more immediately useful than the 70% cut, say, via Steam. But the time and money that you spend on tier rewards and updates chews up a lot of that extra 25%, and that's if you even make it to your goal. On Steam, you've got a much larger audience to appeal to, and it's really hard to watch the performance of something like Baldur's Gate 3 or our own Deepfield's Abiotic Factor, one of the most successful launches in New Zealand, of a New Zealand-made game on Steam, and not see the potential in the Steam audience for drawing in an audience for your game that's able to also help fund development and invest their time into making your game better. So that's it, my cheat sheets. So basically all I'm saying is with a bunch of hard work, time, effort and planning, it should be easy to be successful in game dev. But how do we thrive in the next few years? Resilient game developers, I believe, will be developing for platform agnosticity. With the rise of VR, cloud gaming, and cross-platform services, more people are going to be playing our games on platforms we may never have intended them to. And with mobile and handheld devices becoming more powerful, our games will be played in ways we might never have intended them to. Not restricting our games through performance decisions, art, and UI layout is something that can help studios see through the slower times and capitalize on in the fast times. It's not necessarily easy, but it has never been easier to build for cross-platform. First parties now deal directly with indie studios. Enrolling with as a developer with them is simple, and dev kits are a lot more accessible for smaller studios. Outside of our own internal teams, there are many porting studio options, and accessing new markets can mean a straightforward SDK integration or even just requiring you to create a page and load up keys. 7 of the top 10 gaming audiences don't speak English as a first language. And I think our capacity to localize our games should be a constraint we lean into. It's easier to design your UI to support languages you might add in future than to adapt or compromise in the future when you want to add those languages. Can you tell we added Brazilian Portuguese after not planning for it? But just have a look at the size of these regions. Some of them are growing faster than others due to the rate of technology adoption. We need to purposefully expand our games reach beyond North America and Western Europe and eFigs. And we need to be getting into East Asia and Southeast Asia. Funding might look difficult at the moment, but I think that's only if we're looking in the places that we spent the last 5 years looking. Kickstarters are no longer as lucrative. Western indie publishers are slowing down while they reorientate. And first parties like Sony, Microsoft, and Apple are taking more conservative approaches in their subscription deals. But there are a lot of publishers still out there, and new ones announced even in the last couple of months. Asia-based publishers are now taking a more global approach. You can speak to a list of investors at any of the big conferences, and even here we have our own homegrown support channel via things like Code and the Game Dev Sector Rebate. But first and foremost, if you don't have a plan to successfully self-publish, then you don't really have a game release plan at all. Studios who set out to build a game that requires a partner, i.e. a foreign entity that will garnish the proceeds, are setting themselves up for a struggle no matter the current situation. Always set out with a plan to self-publish. It immediately puts you in a better negotiating position if you do receive offers, and if you do accept an offer, it should only mean that you're making the game better rather than making it at all. The additional support means addressing those failure indicators and increasing those success multipliers I was talking about earlier. But I believe we will see funders wanting to sign studios with track records of high sales, pushing their developers for sequels, and reinvigorating their back catalogue through aforementioned sequels, remasters, and expanding the IP, both in games, but also other mediums like film and TV. And then they'll run out of redos, and the cycle of pumping money into fresh ideas will begin anew. Some of this is already here. It's just going to take a bit of time for the core of our industry to realize that the world shifted while we weren't really watching. So ready for some spicy stuff. That seems fine. It's no secret that the more stakeholders involved that care about money over the game itself is a recipe for stifling delight, both of our players and game developers alike. However, these studios have their place in our industry ecosystem. I'm not saying it's a great place, but it is a place. They provide the majority of the jobs in our industry. They allow us to learn the science and art of developing games, crafting worlds and engaging audiences. And from that, we get ideas on how we might do things differently, better. Developers will then go off and form their own independent studios, backed by the confidence brought in their experience. They make a hit, grow their studio. They make another hit, go public, start making decisions based on shareholder pressure rather than player experience, and the cycle begins anew. Basically, we're going to have some incredible new studios and new games emerging in the next 3 to 10 years, and then they'll become evil about 15 years after that. Platforms like Roblox and UEFN are not only providing new opportunities for aspiring game developers, but are also changing the way games are consumed and created, becoming a complete and isolated ecosystem in themselves. These platforms offer tools that simplify game development, making it accessible to a broader audience. This democratization of game development means that we can expect a surge of diverse and innovative games coming from creators who may not have had traditional development backgrounds, or at least not what we have come to see as a traditional background in the last decade. The ability to monetize these creations directly through the platform already sees developers working exclusively within these ecosystems. And for all my talk about platform agnosticity, we might all be Roblox developers by the end of the decade. Money spent on VR games may well overtake other mediums in the next 10 years. Already it's sitting at just under half of PC gaming market, with massive growth in Asia especially. That snuck up. Lighter, more ergonomic designs, higher resolution displays, and improved motion tracking are reducing barriers to entry and enhancing user experiences. And development and haptic feedback technology are coming along quickly. On the AR front, we have the richest companies in the world like Apple, Google, and Microsoft all investing heavily in AR technology and hopefully competing healthily against each other. We're seeing much more refined and user-friendly devices. The rollout of 5G networks should support the expected significant growth of AR gaming by providing faster and more reliable internet to enable real-time multiplayer experiences with low latency. AI will be used for good and for evil in the future of the game industry, just like it and many other hacks already are. There is a need to be suspicious, to protect, but we will also find AI becoming an increasing part of entertainment development. The machine demands more content. Procedural content generation, AI-driven storytelling, and adaptive game mechanics are just a few areas where AI is going to make a significant impact. We may point to AI and automation, these tools that make something much faster to do than previously, or allow people to perform tasks that previously required a skill set they don't have, as a threat to our future careers. While we cannot get complacent, historically, when a new tool is introduced to our industry, the number of jobs continue to increase. Participants become more diverse, and the types of games that get made become more distinct, more human than ever before, because the time that the game developers are able to focus on the curated touches and increase the ability to craft our vision. But oh boy, there is going to be a lot of shovelware to wade through in the future. Collaborations will become an important venture, cross-game but cross-media as well. Game developers will more and more start thinking of themselves as entertainment developers in the future. Movies and TV shows based on video game IP are already worth billions annually, and the crossovers between screen and games is getting closer each year. Traditionally, we've been the misunderstood, prefer to ignore step cousin of the shiny screen industry, but no more. We're seeing that dynamic shift now, and the TV and screen will benefit from their new creative overlords. Because when it comes to rich world building and storytelling, you cannot beat games as a medium. But our industry is also going to benefit hugely from the increased exchanges and collaborations. Because when it comes to how we frame and present our worlds and narratives, it's hard to beat screen on that count. Our jobs will become more interchangeable between our industries. We'll use more of each other's tricks and techniques, and we will see more screen stars crossing over into games and more game and narrative designers crossing over into screen. The potential for esports to rival traditional sports in popularity is significant in the next few decades, especially with the younger generation coming in. As technology advances, I expect to see new forms of competitive gaming that blend physical and virtual experiences, further expanding the reach and appeal of esports. Generally, though, this lives far outside my sphere, with the focus remaining on just a select few titles for the foreseeable future. Ooh. Blockchains, NFTs, gross. But this too will be figured out, and as soon as it provides value to us as a community, rather than to scheming grifters, we will adopt it. In many situations, the time and effort we invest into games is directly adding value to a studio. An MMO without players or a content creation platform without creators has nothing to offer anyone. We've been proving for decades that player investment has real-life monetary value, like selling your account or a rare item for real money. But it's not something that's widely accessible. Recently, the question of whether digital asset ownership persists after death has been raised. These are a few areas that we may see the integration of blockchain addressing. It is so easy to live in our little bubble in game development, and it's certainly enough to keep us all occupied. But this industry changes so fast, and by keeping an eye on the emerging trends, keeping a temperature gauge on how players feel about things, we can better prepare for a changing future, ensuring that we remain relevant and position ourselves to take advantage of the changes that we align with. So, as we look to the future of game development, we must acknowledge the profound changes and challenges that lie ahead of us. The gaming industry is in continual flux, poised for remarkable growth and innovation, and many of our homegrown studios are poster children for exactly that. But we're also facing significant hurdles. We will need to navigate economic downturns and be smart about how we prioritize our time and efforts to make a game worthy of our players and maximize who we reach with it, while also preparing for the next big revolutions to ensure we're not left behind. The future is already happening. The tools that once required significant investment are now accessible to everyone, democratizing game development, and we're seeing the fruits of that in experiences that are different from what we've ever encountered before. User-generated content platforms, VR and AR advancements, AI integration. These technologies will not only change how games are made and played, but also expand the very definition of what games can be. However, the fundamentals never change. We are world builders and storytellers, and we enable our players to be the protagonists. Immerse our players in our worlds, and we've set ourselves up for a wonderful future. Thank you.